will be looking at the role of the advocate within the CYAC multidisciplinary team, including the ways in which the advocate role has changed the approach to child abuse investigations, specific responsibilities associated with the advocate role, a walk through the advocate's typical case at the CYAC, the challenges and successes of our program, and finally ending with learning outcomes and program development. Between April 2011 and March 2013, Boost and its community partners run a pilot project to demonstrate the benefits of the CYAC and to begin to address some of the practical implementation questions while securing a permanent location. Whilst all partners were not co-located, there was a child-friendly neutral location for the investigation to take place. Toronto police officers, children's aid workers, and the advocate would meet with the family at the interview location and carry out the investigation. Medical and CYAC counselors would be available if needed via phone for consultation. One of the goals of the pilot project was to pilot the advocate position and determine the effectiveness of this new role for families and the multidisciplinary team members. During this time, 2 advocates provided services to families attending for investigations. The Child Youth Advocacy Program received 193 notifications of child abuse investigations, with 119 families consenting to services. An evaluation of the pilot was conducted, and overall the role of the advocate received positive feedback by both the MDT and families. By having the advocate provide the ongoing contact with the family, this allowed multidisciplinary team members more time to focus on their roles and responsibilities within the investigation. Positive communication between the advocate and all of the MDT members throughout the pilot allowed for a more seamless flow of services, and families reported that they really did feel as though they had a team working and supporting them throughout. One of the interesting outcomes was that the advocacy services were consistently utilized by families if the investigation took place on site. The advocate's ability to immediately meet and connect with the family to facilitate consent for ongoing services. So essentially, no initial contact at the time of the investigation reduced the likelihood of families following through for advocacy services and support.
For those of you who just joined, please mute your devices because we are recording this. Thank you. Boost Child Youth Advocacy Center officially opened its doors in October of 2013. We started off with 2 advocates, and we now have 3 full-time, 1 part-time, and 1 specialized advocate. The center is a child-friendly environment which houses every member of the multidisciplinary team in one location. This includes police, children's aid workers, advocates, counselors, and medical. It is important to note that not all CYACs have the same model. Our model is voluntary and has 1 advocate assigned to each family. In order to provide services, the advocate requires informed consent from the family. What makes the advocacy program unique and valuable is that criminal charges or an open child protection file are not required for advocacy services. The advocate can provide the family with support for as long as it is required. The following video will provide you with a brief overview of how child abuse investigations were conducted prior to the CYAC and how the role of the advocate has impacted and benefited this new approach to child abuse investigation.
In October of 2013, the first CYAC opened its doors in Toronto. Prior to the development of the CYAC, the response to child abuse investigations involved various professionals from different agencies in different locations. This required children and their families to navigate the system and tell their story multiple times.
So the advocate is meeting with multiple professionals. And it takes a long time going back and forth, and it can be a very confusing time for the family.
Youth Advocacy Center has a child-centered focus, offering co-located services that provide a multidisciplinary team approach to child abuse investigation. The CYAC model aims to fill a gap in service by including the Child Youth Advocate role.
The advocate is introducing everyone.
The advocate, along with the multidisciplinary team, make up the foundational building blocks to ensure that the client and a family are the top priority.
The conference. It's supposed to be at 1, but I don't think that's like our time 1. I don't know.
We would just ask at this time for everyone to mute their devices, please, as this presentation is being recorded. Thank you. So what does the role of the advocate look like? Depending on the model that your organization adopts, the role of the advocate can look different. Within our model, the role of the advocate offers immediate and ongoing support to children, youth, and their families from the time of the initial investigation until services are complete or no longer required. Whilst our program is voluntary, if a family would like the support of an advocate, we do require consents to be signed to allow for sharing of information and case coordination. Youth 12 years and over are asked to sign consent themselves. However, it's your judgment as to whether they really understand what they are signing. Informed consent is crucial. Do they even understand what consent means? Maybe using the word permission. Typically within our model, the consent forms and limits of confidentiality are explained in the presence of the caregivers with younger children. We have found this to be the best way so everybody has a comprehensive understanding. At the time of the investigation, the advocate will provide crisis support to the family. The caregiver's psychoeducation is also something that is frequently provided. The most common supports we have found caregivers need are how they can best respond and support their child, managing their own responses and reactions, and what will happen next. As expected, caregivers struggle with could they have done anything different to protect their child, so a lot of work that the advocate is doing at this time is validating their feelings while supporting them and reassuring them this is not their fault. This is a message we have to review on numerous occasions with many caregivers. At the time of meeting with the family, the advocate will carry out a needs assessment with regards to other issues and challenges they could be experiencing, such as housing, finances, shelter. We know that all of the external stresses can impact their ability to be able to respond to their child in a healthy and supportive manner. Not only does this allow for a more comprehensive understanding of the family and what they are going through, it can also help shape how we connect the family to additional supports moving forward. As we know, children and youth can have their own unique ways of coping with stressful and challenging circumstances, and sometimes the coping skills they choose are not always healthy. The advocate will meet with the youth individually and carry out a suicide and self-harm assessment. This has been a conversation that we have had at the CYAC and revisited on several occasions as to who should carry out this assessment, the advocate or the counsellor. The initial flow of services for the CYAC investigation was that all families would meet with a counsellor at the time of the investigation. However, in practice, we realized that families did not always want or need this at the time. And depending on how long they had been here, they did not want to necessarily meet with another person. With that being said, we wanted to make sure that each youth was checked in on around suicide and self-harm. So it was decided that the advocate would complete the assessment and then, depending on the outcome, would facilitate next steps. If the advocate did have safety concerns for the youth, then a CYAC counselor, as well as the advocacy manager, would be available for immediate consultation. In smaller communities, it may be that the advocate is also offering counselling services, in which case this naturally will be something they would carry out. In our model, whilst the advocate and the counsellor do work closely together, we are trying to be clear with our roles and responsibilities. This also makes it much easier for the families. The advocate also provides regular and consistent check-in with the family and youth. And depending on the age of the youth, it is important to maintain a regular contact with them directly and not just through the parents or caregivers. On occasions, we have heard from youth that they have felt excluded in the process if the communication is with the caregiver only. Caregivers not passing on information to the youth for whatever reason can also impact the rapport that you are trying to build. But perhaps the most important thing to remember is that there may be things that the youth would not want to share or ask in front of their caregiver. So by having this contact directly, you provide the opportunity for the youth to ask questions or to talk to somebody. A big component of the advocate role is explaining the process in general to families. Whilst not discussing specifics about their situation, we can explain what the investigation might look like and why it takes the time it does. Even at the time of the initial investigation, it is not uncommon for families to ask about the court process and what that will look like. It is the role of the advocate to reassure that if and when that occurs, the family will be supported. For many of the families, their knowledge of the court is based on TV shows, and it is part of our job to explain in general terms what this could look like if the youth or a caregiver is persistent with specific court questions. Within the model that we use at the CYAC, we also hold regular case reviews for the cases that come through the centre. Each member of the MDT can request a case review at any time for any reason to bring all involved to the table. Having everybody literally at the same place at the same time has helped with the communication and seamless flow that the CYAC hope to achieve. Outside agencies that are working with the family are also invited and encouraged to attend. We typically do not invite families to attend at this time, as it can seem overwhelming for them, and their role as the advocate is also to provide a voice for the family or youth. If the advocate is aware of any concerns, questions, or worries that the family may have, this is the opportunity for the team to discuss and problem solve. Typically, the advocate will then connect with the family or youth afterwards and update them at the meeting and discuss the suggestions and recommendations. In case in which charges are laid, the advocate facilitates the referral to the Child Victim Witness Program here at the Centre and Child Victim Witness within the courthouse. The CYAC has been fortunate to develop further and enhance the relationship with the workers housed at the courthouses across the city, and the advocate ensures that the child or youth is connected to the victim witness worker sooner rather than later. We recognize that the roles and responsibilities for the advocate and who fills the role of the advocate may look different within your model depending on the resources and needs of your specific community. In some CYACs, the position may be filled by volunteers, police-based victim services, or it may be that there is no specific advocate assigned for each family. In our model, we have one advocate per family who remains as their contact person throughout. We are lucky enough to have specific programs that help children and youth at the different stages of healing and the investigation. We have advocates, CYAC counsellors, assessment and therapy staff, and the child victim witness workers. If you are in a community with limited resources, these may be some of the additional roles that the advocate will fill.
All right, thank you.
There are many different responsibilities that the advocate has within their role. To further explain the role, I will discuss how these responsibilities are conducted in a typical case at the CYAC. Now, we say typical, but it is important to note that every case that comes through our doors is unique in its own way. However, sometimes they require the advocate to do the following steps, perhaps in a different order or maybe at a different time in the investigation, but overall, this is what a typical case may look like for the advocate. When an investigation is coming into the CYAC, the advocate is notified, usually from their supervisor, but in some cases it will be a member of the MDT, such as a police officer or a children's aid worker. The timeline for notifications may vary. This may occur within a day of the investigation, 10 minutes before, or even as the family arrives in the reception area. It definitely keeps us on our toes. When the family arrives, the advocate greets them, brings them into our waiting space in the investigation area, and provides them with a tour of the space. The advocate will then explain that although we do not discuss the specifics around the case, this is what the family might expect while here at the CYAC. The advocate informs the family about their role, being a neutral participant in the investigative process, who works with Children's Aid and police, but are here to help support the family. As Julie discussed earlier, one of our responsibilities is to go over our CYAC consent form, and this would be conducted at the appropriate time. The advocate will also discuss the CYAC services available and the limits of confidentiality. As mentioned earlier, the advocate will usually meet with the child or youth on their own as well as caregivers in order to ensure the family has had time to check in and express any questions or concerns privately. The advocate usually will meet with caregivers while the child or youth is in another room conducting their interview. At this time, the advocate discusses other supports and services, as well as common responses and reactions to trauma, and ways to provide supportive messaging. The advocate will also meet with the youth separately to discuss confidentiality and conduct a check-in around suicide risk, self-harm, and a symptom checklist. If informed consent is received, the advocate will be able to complete the following services for the family if they are required. If the child, youth, or caregiver requires immediate counseling support, the advocate can facilitate this introduction. For instance, at times during an investigation, a family may require extra support in the moment. If consent is received from the family, the advocate would then consult with a CYAC counselor that is in the office and ask them to attend the investigation to check in with the family and offer support. Alternatively, if the family requires support after the investigation, the advocate will create a referral for a CYAC counselor and facilitate that introduction as well. Following an investigation, the advocate and multidisciplinary team meet to debrief and discuss the next possible steps with the goal of ensuring that everyone is on the same page and the family's needs will be met. Unless otherwise discussed with the family, the advocate will place a call to follow up with the family within 72 hours of attending the CYAC for an investigation to check in and see how the family is doing. The advocate will also facilitate referrals that are requested by the family or recommended by members of the MDT and then discussed with the family. If a case review is deemed necessary, the advocate will attend the case review on the family's behalf. The advocate will discuss any questions or concerns that the family may have and provide the appropriate updates to them as well. If an investigation occurs after hours or if it occurs outside of the CYAC, an advocate can still be assigned to this case. Advocates do not attend investigations outside of the CYAC, such as at a school, station, or hospital, regardless of if it occurs during business hours or after hours. These cases would be received as follow-up, generally in the next day or so after the investigation has occurred. However, if an advocate is available, they may attend an after-hours investigation if it is being conducted at the CYAC. When an advocate is not present, the investigative team is to provide a CYAP folder to the family, which contains an information sheet, brochure, consent forms, and a business card. If the investigative team receives verbal or written consent, the advocate will contact the family within 72 hours following the interview to introduce themselves and offer CYAP services. However, if consent is not obtained, the advocate will not contact the family. The following are various types of referrals that an advocate can make for a family. The CYAC internal referrals may include SCAN, mental health consultant, assessment and treatment program at Boost, and the Child Victim Witness Support Program at Boost. Community referrals may include medical, community mental health agencies, victim witness assistance program, public assistance, legal assistance, housing assistance, or immigration. It is important to note that the CYAC has a partnership with the Victim Witness Assistance Program, which allows the advocate to generate the referral directly to them rather than have a police officer submit it. This referral is the same form that is generated and submitted for Boost Child Victim Witness Support Program. There have been various challenges and successes in the advocacy program from the pilot and over the years since the CYAC has opened. We will discuss some of these challenges and successes while integrating case examples to provide context. One challenge that was experienced predominantly in the pilot project was the initial buy-in from the multidisciplinary team in regards to the advocate role. Changing the way that child abuse investigations were conducted and including a new role in this process was challenging at times. It required an adaptation to the MDT's role, which took some time to adjust to. However, over time, the advocate has become an integral figure in the MDT, and as the role developed, the MDT became more welcoming and understanding of its importance. In a similar vein, there have been some challenges in defining the advocate role, specifically in comparison to the CYAC counselor role. This is due to some crossover in terms of the role and responsibilities within each case. This continues to be a discussion and program development goal at the CYAC. Follow-up cases, such as after-hours or off-site investigations just described, differ from immediate CYAC cases because the advocate does not have the ability to meet the family in person during the investigation and be there for the family while they're in crisis to offer support and begin developing rapport. Although you can consult with the officer and children's aid prior to contacting the family, it is always more challenging to do a cold call to the family and try to explain the advocate role and the CYAC services over the phone. In some cases, contacting youth without having met them in person may be a challenge because they may not readily trust you. This has become less of an issue because the CYAC police officers and children's aid workers have begun to explain the advocate role during the investigation and are informing the child, youth, or family that a CYAC advocate will be contacting them shortly and receiving consent of the advocates to do so. But there still remains to be challenges. At times, it is difficult for families to attend the CYAC to meet in person following an investigation. So communication is primarily completed over the phone, and the advocate may never meet the family in person. The advocate's ability to balance long-term cases while responding to immediate investigations is vital and can be challenging at times. Day-to-day work must occur for long-term cases. This includes following up, connecting, and checking in with the family or MDT, which all requires time and effort to complete. Due to the nature of our work, a case can come in at any time, and advocates have to immediately respond. Balancing the need to set up meetings with clients and being able to ensure you are available for coverage when assigned can be very challenging. As mentioned, some cases may occupy the majority of an advocate's day, so advocates have to be able to find a balance between last-minute cases and completing other casework. Similar to this, an advocate must be flexible, especially in their ability to adapt to each case and the varying needs of each client. Individuals have different responses to trauma, therefore advocates must be attuned to their clients and be prepared to support the family in whichever way they may need. As well, at any given time, advocates need to be prepared for a case to come in and provide their undivided attention to it. The timeline for the investigation is unknown, therefore advocates may spend a large amount of their day attending to a case. Although we described a typical case, an advocate needs to be prepared for unique circumstances with each and every investigation. The advocate may also have very limited information when a family attends the CYAC. This may also be true for the police or children's aid worker as well. This can be challenging because without details surrounding the case, advocates cannot prepare for a case and begin to develop an idea of how to best support this family. There have also been instances where the information has changed during an interview. For instance, the CYAC does not invite the accused to be interviewed at this location. Therefore, the advocate does not provide services or support to the accused. At times, there have been investigations which lead to disclosures of caregivers who are in attendance and end in apprehension. The advocate may have been meeting with that caregiver unaware at the time that the situation would change, and the caregiver would not be receiving support from the advocate going forward. I will now describe a case study that is very rare, but it's an example of being flexible in the role and information changing while the family is attending the CYAC. There was a family of 5, 3 boys and 2 parents. The younger boy attended the CYAC with his middle brother and 2 parents, following a disclosure of sexual abuse from his oldest brother. During the investigation, the advocate was sitting with middle brother and father, while mother was in a separate room in need of some time alone, and the youngest brother, who had made the disclosure, was in another room speaking with an officer for his interview. After a half an hour or so, the CYAC worker came into the waiting space and asked the advocate to remove father and middle brother and place them in a separate office waiting space on the other side of the floor. This writer did so and was told afterwards that the youngest brother disclosed that it was not his older brother, it was his middle brother who was sexually abusing him. Oftentimes, an advocate will not know what is going to be disclosed, and the advocate needs to be ready for anything while remaining calm and continuing to support the family throughout the process. Reminding the family that we are not involved in the investigation, therefore cannot discuss the details as we're neutral, but we are there to support them.
The advocate caseload has been a challenge as there is currently no cap on cases. The advocate caseload rolls over each year and files can be reopened at any time if a family requires us to do so. As well, we often have instances where the file has been closed but a new disclosure occurs and we reopen the file at the CYAC following a new investigation. Some of our cases are short-term and require less work than others, while some cases are much more long-term and can occupy most of our days. Sometimes cases which have not required much advocacy initially find the situation suddenly changes and we have to become more heavily involved. As well, we want to be able to provide the best support to all of our families coming into the CYAC. Therefore, advocates are assigned to all cases coming in as often as that is possible. All of these factors impact our workload and make the ability to cap our caseload a challenge. Here are some stats collected relating to the advocate caseload between April 2015 and April 2016. 267 families consented to child and youth advocacy services, with 512 participants in the program. 70% were investigations that took place at the CYAC, and 30% were follow-up cases where the advocate was assigned after the investigation had taken place. At any time, the advocate carried a caseload of between 25 and 35 families, with approximately 120 cases a year. There have been occasions when we have had multiple family members attend for investigations who, for different reasons, have had to be kept separate. This can provide challenges around maintaining boundaries and confidentiality. One example could be in sibling cases, having to keep them separate during the investigation process. It is very important in these cases that all of the multidisciplinary team members communicate with each other around developments and outcomes. Typically, as we have already mentioned, we would have one advocate assigned to each family. However, in exceptional circumstances, we may deem it appropriate or necessary to assign more than one advocate to a family. For example, a case that came to the center recently involved two daughters who both disclosed extensive sexual abuse by their father. Given the gravity of this particular situation and the competing needs and responses by the daughters and their mom, we decided it was more appropriate to have each of them have their own advocate. It was explained to each family member in this case that whilst there were 3 advocates working with them, they could each expect the same level of confidentiality individually and that nothing could be communicated without first obtaining consent. All 3 have been connected with their individual support, and maybe in time the need for 3 advocates may not be, but this is something that would be revisited in communication with all family members. Another issue that we have come across quite frequently is where the youth is not consenting to services, however the caregiver is requesting support. These cases are particularly challenging when the youth is not consenting to any of their information being communicated with their caregiver or the counsellor that their caregiver will be seeing. In situations like this, we are able to offer support in more of a general sense with the caregiver, such as providing them information and support around the common responses and reactions and how best they can support their child. Often the advocate will meet with the youth and they will sign consent for advocacy services, but will request that certain pieces of information not to be shared with their caregiver. This typically happens if a medical exam has been carried out and the youth has instructed that the results not be shared with their caregiver, or alternatively, at the time leading up to trial, the parent or caregiver may begin asking certain questions to gather more information about the case. Part of the role of the advocate is helping the caregiver understand the reasons why there may be certain pieces of information their child may not want them to know. This can often be very difficult for them to comprehend and process, and the advocate needs to explain that right now their unconditional love and support is the most important thing they can do for their child. With many of the families we work with, there are many layers in their lives that they have highlighted needing support around. One of the challenges we have faced is containing what support we can offer and what support we can't. For example, a mother who is telling you that she may want to move house but does not know where to begin with the housing process. This may be something that will impact her and her child, but is this an appropriate support that could be provided by the advocate? We had found this becoming a recurring challenge for our team. Due to the resources that we have and the high caseload we carry, it isn't always practical for us to be able to support families with everything. We had to start thinking creatively and outside of the box. We knew that families for sure needed someone to help them navigate the system, but we knew that the advocate in certain cases was not that right person. The response to this will be addressed later on in the presentation when we look at the program development and the introduction of an additional support. On occasions when there are multiple families here, finding space to have a quiet and confidential discussion can be a challenge. Again, another situation where all of the MGT members need to communicate around logistics of where everyone is and where each investigation is up to. Sometimes it can feel like musical rooms to try and find a private space, but it is key for having a discussion with the family at the time of the investigation. Within our team, we have found having our cell phones with us at these times extremely helpful, even just to send a quick message to let your team members know your investigation is completed and a room has become free. If you are in the process of designing your own CYAC, we would strongly recommend being mindful of the private space that you are creating for your families, such as the number of rooms that are to be able to be accessed, the layout of the space. If your meeting room is off the investigation room, are you going to have multiple people coming to your area? Soundproofing. If the rooms are side by side, no one wants to feel that the person next door is hearing everything being said.
Now, although there are challenges in this role, we have seen a lot of success in the program as well. The amazing part about the CYAC is that the MDT believes in this model. Everyone that works here wants to be here and believes in what we are doing. This has resulted in the development of strong team relationships. All members of the MDT work together to continue to develop the CYAC and the relationships within this model to best meet the needs of the client. In the same vein, what has helped in this effort is the fact that the MDT is co-located. Co-location has allowed for more dialogue with the MDT and truly opened up lines of communication. Having access to all members of the MDT within the same building has allowed for easier communication. Advocates are able to better act on as the client's primary liaison because we can communicate with the MDT without playing phone tag and waiting on emails. This also saves time to focus on the client and helps the MDT focus on the investigative process. Co-location also results in a better understanding of each other's roles and responsibilities. Members of the MDT see the roles in action and learn how to integrate the advocate into the investigative process to best meet the needs of the clients during each and every case. Being co-located has allowed for a closer relationship with the police and children's aid workers. It is mostly recognized when cases have non-CYAC officers and CAS workers assigned and attend the CYAC for investigation. This often results in a different dynamic during the investigation, with the advocates having to be very informative and assertive in our role to stay involved and continue communication. As outside of the CYAC, it is not as widely understood what exactly the advocate's involvement is during the investigative process and beyond. With that being said, our CYAC team has developed a new perspective on investigations, truly realizing the benefit of the advocate and actively integrating them into their investigations. At the beginning, it was common for an advocate to receive a follow-up case, as the officer may not have deemed it necessary to include them on the case. This has changed drastically, and now, at times, the advocate has to prioritize which cases they can assist with, as there may be multiple cases attending the CYAC, and there may not be enough advocates to be assigned in that moment. In recognizing the importance of the advocate role, officers have become more considerate in their approach to investigations to best meet the needs of their clients. A prime example of this may be demonstrated in the following case study of Sally. Near the end of 2015, the CYAC received a call that a 16-year-old student, Sally, had been sexually assaulted by a peer while at school. A CYAC officer went to the school to conduct the interview. Following his interview, the officer felt that the teen needed support from the Child and Youth Advocate and asked that an advocate attend the school with him the following day while he continued the investigation. I met with Sally at the school, described my role, and provided her with my contact information. 3 days later, I followed up with Sally, and she said she was feeling okay, but would definitely like to receive some counseling support. I told Sally I would be able to set this up for her and confirmed that her mother would also like to receive caregiver support. 2 days later, I received a text message from Sally. She was very distressed and asked if we could talk. Following my phone conversation with her, I consulted a CYAC counselor and an advocate manager. I was able to advocate for my client to receive immediate counseling support. It was a Friday afternoon, and the counselor would be able to see her first thing on Monday morning. When I told Sally the plan, I could feel the relief in her voice, and she expressed that she was very grateful for this immediate session. Over the course of her counseling, I would check in with her CYAC counselor to see how she was doing to ensure we had all of the referrals in place for any other services she may require. I also sent a referral for a Child Victim Witness Assistance Program as well as Boost Court Support Program to assist her in the court process when the time came. At the end of her counseling sessions, her CYAC counselor felt she was doing a lot better and made amazing progress. A few weeks later, I received a text message from Sally. She was in distress and needed support. I was able to speak with her on the phone, and we created a plan and went over some of the coping strategies she had discussed with her CYAC counselor in previous sessions. I then informed her counselor that she had contacted me and required additional support. I have now suggested a case review to meet with Sally's MDT to go over the next steps for her to ensure that she remains at the top of the priority list. Now, although the Child and Youth Advocate would not normally attend an off-site investigation, this is a great example of how the advocate was recognized to be a valuable asset for this teen. In this circumstance, the officer recognized that this teen was in distress and believed that a Child and Youth Advocate could provide the support she needed during this difficult time. The ability for the officer to recognize this signifies a shift in the approach to child abuse investigations and the value of the advocate role. In addition to this, due to Sally's age, a children's aid worker was not involved. This is an important piece, as the advocate is then the youth's primary source of support for referral to services following the investigation. Without a Child and Youth Advocate, Sally may not have received the emotional support she needed. This is also a good example of a case where, if an advocate did not become involved and this officer did not recognize the need, Sally may have slipped through the cracks. In a time of crisis, it is often very difficult for people to reach out for support or even know how to find it. I was able to meet with Sally and develop a rapport, which allowed her to feel comfortable enough to text me when she was in distress. Due to the nature of my role, I was able to provide her with a quick response. I was also able to coordinate services very quickly and work together with the MDT to ensure we had a plan for Sally so she felt supported. I am now in the process of advocating on her behalf to negotiate more counseling services while she waits for longer-term counseling support. I'm also coordinating caregiver support for her mother as she was ill and not able to attend until now. I will continue to be involved with this family until they are well connected with long-term services.
The positive feedback for the role of the advocate has continued to be highlighted by caregivers since the opening of the CYAC. Caregivers have explained at the beginning of the investigation there is so much happening, new faces, new people, new roles and responsibilities taking place, appointments taking place, that it can be so overwhelming for them. With so much information being given to them at a time of such emotion, it is not uncommon to hear that the vast majority of what is said to them is forgotten or not even heard. Having an advocate call them the next day and either talk to them over the phone or invite them to come back in to provide an overview of what happened is something that is consistently reported to be very helpful. Whilst the families know that we are part of the team with police and children's aid, they appreciate that the advocate is neutral in their investigation. They know that when the advocate is connecting with them, it is as a source of support, and they are not going to be asked specifically about the incident, but that someone is reaching out to see how they're doing and what can be offered to help them during this incredibly stressful and emotional time. Because the advocate had already explained to the families that we will be reaching out to them throughout the course of our involvement, they have reported that this has been a great source of comfort to them. People's circumstances and situations can change, and having the advocate check in allows for additional services and support to be accessed at a later date if required. At our CYAC, we have counsellors from some of our community partner agencies on site. Having this combination of professionals with different approaches, experiences, and area of expertise really allows for a nice complement of support for the families we work with. For example, we have a counsellor who is an art therapist who can not only offer individual sessions to youth, but also able to facilitate a coping group for teen girls. Alternatively, one counsellor has extensive knowledge in intrafamilial abuse and particularly caregiver support related to this. Building community relationships with outside agencies helps to facilitate the seamless transition for families from the short-term support to something more long-term and specific if required. Having an advocate working with the youth and families and having the regular check-ins can also assist in facilitating earlier than anticipated connections with other referrals. For example, if you're checking in with a child or youth and they share that they are anxious about court or have several court-related questions, it may make more sense to have them meet with one of the child victim witness workers. Typically, the child victim witness worker will meet with the child or youth once a date has been set for either a preliminary hearing or trial. At that time, they would explain what their day in court would look like, who will be in the courtroom, testimonial aids, etc. If we know that a child is extremely anxious, this meeting could help dissipate some worries. Another success to be highlighted is that since the advocate is contacting and supporting the families, other MD members are able to focus on their jobs with regards to the investigation process. The MD members have shared that this takes pressure off them not having to respond to the volume of calls that historically they would have had to address. Between October 1st, 2015 and October 1st, 2016, here are some of the stats highlighting the contact that the advocate has made with families, multidisciplinary team members, and community support agencies. Before the CYAC, children and youth would have to go to a police station to tell their story of what they had been through. With our CYAC model, the focus is making sure that the child or youth is as comfortable as possible to be able to tell what has happened to them. The advocate takes the time to meet with them and make sure they understand what their time at the center will look like. Without discussing a case specifically, the advocate is able to take some time to build rapport with the youth and relay any helpful information to the officer or child protection worker about how they are connecting. One example that comes to mind is a teenager boy who disclosed sexual abuse. He was extremely nervous about attending the center with his mum. We were able to take the time to orient him and explain who he would be meeting and what the role was of everybody he would meet today. It was explained to him that we would do everything we could to make this as comfortable as possible. Throughout the initial conversation with the youth, he did not make any eye contact with me and rarely spoke more than a few words. I could let the officer know that he was very anxious about being here, and it was discussed and agreed that we would just give him some time to get used to the center before she would meet with him. Over the next while, I could get to know him a little better, and we talked about what his interests in life were. He shared that he loved 1980s music, and that when he was feeling anxious, he would put his headphones on, and this would help him relax. During that conversation, he actually lifted his head and made eye contact with me for the first time. Knowing that listening to music relaxed him, we were able to give him that time he needed, and he soon told us he was ready to talk to the officer, where he made a full disclosure. This is an example of how important it is to slow things down and take the time to talk to the youth and see how they are doing. Historically, this young man would likely have been at a police station and may not have felt comfortable enough to be able to make a disclosure of what someone had done to him.
With any new program, there are going to be challenges and successes. which lead to learning outcomes and continued program development. Since beginning the pilot, we have learned a lot about our program and our clients' needs. We continue to learn, and this results in program development. One of the learning outcomes that became apparent in the pilot pertained to the CYAC counselors. It was originally believed that the CYAC counselors would meet with each family during every investigation. As Julie mentioned earlier in the presentation, although we have various CYAC counselors on site, there are a lot of moving parts during the investigation. And we aim to not overwhelm the family with too many professionals during a time of crisis. It was decided that we would no longer include the CYAC counselors during every investigation unless the advocate deemed it necessary and it was offered to the family or the family requested it. An additional learning outcome of the pilot surrounded the debrief session that would occur at the end of each investigation. When the pilot began, if consents were received during the investigation, the MDT would come together to debrief afterwards. This would be helpful for the MDT to end an investigation on the same page and result in less work for the advocate, as they would not have to track down the team and collect information to share with other members. Over time, it became obvious that debriefing after each case tended to be difficult. It was underestimated how many cases would be attending the CYAC and the length of time each investigation would be. Therefore, these debriefs were reduced, and the advocate ended up taking on the responsibility of following up with each member separately. However, over time, the advocates have begun to try to conduct a debrief following each investigation again, as it is considered helpful and results in less work tracking the MDT down. This may require some modifications from the original pilot debrief, which will be facilitated by an open discussion with the MDT to conduct a solid plan.
Over the course of our time as the CYAC, there have been occasions when we have really had to stop and look at the expectations that the youth have for us and that the agency has for us as staff around availability to clients. Each of our advocates have their own work cell phone that clients are given the contact number for. Initially, we were Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. However, over time, we have addressed and responded to the need of different hours by staggering a workday. This allows us to be available for evening investigations and after-school contact and appointments with youth. In cases where youth have no or limited support, the advocate can easily become their source of support if we aren't careful. In this day and age, technology allows for instant responses and reactions, and the majority of teens have cell phones. We are in the process of creating a crisis card that we will work on with the youth. It will highlight our hours of availability, crisis lines within the city, and emergency phone numbers. What we are also striving to do is work with the youth to ask them to identify an informal support person that they can contact if they need additional support. This is intended to be something that the youth can carry around with them. Although our workdays are typically Monday to Friday, we know that a crisis very rarely happens during those convenient times. As a worker, it is important to have supervision and consultation available should you need it in supporting the youth. One example I would like to share with you highlights the importance of boundaries and safety planning with the youth, and I would just like to talk about a case study with Jane, a 19-year-old female. Jane has very little positive family influence and support, and she has consistently over the years engaged in risky behavior and has a very complex trauma history. I had begun working with Jane, and at the time of this incident had been working with her for several months, so we had begun to establish a supportive relationship. Jane was living with her boyfriend, who was believed to be involved in gangs and was currently on weapons charges. Jane did not have a phone at the time, and we would communicate via her text app, which obviously only worked when she had Wi-Fi. I had gone out of town for a weekend, and I ummed and ahed about taking my work phone, and in the end I decided I would. On Saturday night, she sent me a message that really needed an immediate response regarding her safety. I had genuine concerns for her safety, and because she was not responding after my initial message, I felt I had to call 911. I was hesitant about doing this as I didn't want her to pull away because I had called the police, but my concerns for her safety were genuine and real. After I had called the police, she did eventually respond, and we had arranged for her to meet with officers away from the location she was at, but they really did need to meet with her. Everything in this case worked out well, and she was safe. She met with the officers, and they then called me to let me know she was okay. This whole experience left me feeling like I made the had I broken her trust by calling the police? At that point in our relationship, I felt that we had begun to develop trust and was relieved when she showed up for her next appointment. I was given a chance to explain in person why I had made the decision I made that night. And once she understood it was done out of concern for her, it allowed us to have a larger conversation about creating a safety plan in general for her. It also made me think of the bigger picture for me as a worker and what I needed to put in place for myself, for Jane, and any other youth I worked with. Over the course of the pilot project and since the opening of the CYAC, we continually see how important the caregivers are in supporting their children following the investigation and a disclosure. Whilst we have the individual support through our CYAC counsellors, we have also offered a caregiver support group. For many of those who attended, they reported that the feeling of having peer support has been huge for them. Knowing that someone else has been through something similar, has similar questions or concerns, has made them feel like they truly aren't going through this alone. Our hope is to be able to offer 2 or 3 groups per year that cover the most frequently asked questions, recurring themes, and/or issues that caregivers have reported. Due to the success of the advocate within the CYAC model, we are now developing specialized and designated advocates. We have, over the past year, begun working with Toronto Police human trafficking enforcement officers to support youth 18 years and under who have been trafficked, and we now have 1 full-time dedicated advocate to work with this youth. The needs of these youth are very different to those of the families and youth we see coming through the CYAC. The majority of youth that we would work with through the CYAC would come to us with a foundation of a home and at least 1 supportive caregiver. What we know about youth who have been trafficked is they typically don't. Right from our initial meeting with the youth, we needed to make sure that we were meeting their basic needs as much as possible, really adopting the Maslow's hierarchy of needs model. So that could be looking for a bed in a shelter or working with them to create a safety plan for where they are currently residing. The traffickers are meeting their hierarchy of needs, albeit in unhealthy ways, and so we as workers must be able to offer them immediate support to minimize the chance of them leaving and returning to that way of life simply because they have no other option. One of the main differences I noticed since I have begun working with youth who have been trafficked is that they don't often self-identify. Our experience at the CYAC was that youth were coming forward because they recognized they had been victimized. With youth who have been trafficked, they have been conditioned and manipulated by the traffickers to believe that this way of life was their choice, or to believe that they are in a relationship with the trafficker. This self-perception is an important survival skill, however, and should be acknowledged and can be reframed to highlight the youth as a strength. We know that the relationship between the trafficker and the youth can be similar to that of a domestic violence relationship, and so workers must be prepared for them to cycle back and forth. When talking with youth who have been trafficked, it is important to listen to the language they use and mirror it. At the CYAC, when we meet with youth, we would typically complete an intake process to gather as much information as we could about their needs to make sure we are supporting them the best way possible. With youth who have been trafficked, the information gathering process could take months. We don't want them to feel as though they are being asked too many questions, which may cause them to withdraw. Their traffickers have gradually and very skillfully over time conditioned them to believe that they are the only ones that can be trusted. They have strategically removed any positive influence or familiar person from their life. The perception they have of the world has been altered and those in it. We know that the prime age for recruitment is between the ages of 12 and 14, a crucial stage of development, a time when they are trying to establish who they are and their view of the world. We know that they have been isolated from any positive influence or contacts in their lives. The majority of girls that I work with under the age of 16 do have caregivers and are returned home, however. We are in the process of developing caregiver support for these parents. We are typically seeing similar responses and reactions from caregivers as they begin to process and accept what their child has been through. Caregivers have such a crucial role in supporting their children upon their return home that this is a priority in our program development. Another priority is building capacity with counsellors who are creative in their approaches to providing support to these youth on an ongoing basis. As an organization, we are really being challenged to rethink the approaches and methods that we use to ensure that we are best providing the services and supports to these youth and family. As Lisha highlighted earlier in the presentation, having an advocate attend at the school could also be helpful for youth, and this is another area we would like to develop further. Building relationships with the school boards would allow for the seamless support to be implemented for these teens, whether it's connecting with a guidance counselor, a social worker, or just simply educating the staff on what their students are going through could it be of huge benefit. Over time, we have also reviewed on several occasions our documentation of information. Typically, we would gather the demographic information of the attending family at the initial stage when they arrive at the CYAC. There have been ongoing discussions, however, related to a symptom checklist and what that would look like. This provides useful information for us to know and to be able to check in around when we contact families, but it's also important for the counselor to have. We recognize that the presentation on the day of the investigation of a child or youth is likely heightened by the fact that they are simply here and the reason for attending. We are currently developing a symptom checklist tool that will suffice as part of the intake package, but also be able to be provided to the CYAC counselor as their referral. Finally, one of the newest developments that we have just implemented is the resource worker position. This is a position within our model that was developed in response to the number of requests we received for community agency, referrals, and additional support. As we talked about earlier in the presentation, we have identified the need for families to be supported in other areas of their life, aside from the investigation they are attending for. We are noticing that we will be receiving referrals from children's aid workers or officers after they have carried out investigations in the community for families specifically looking for community support. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that families were connected in a timely manner to support, but with the limits on the resources of staff, combined with the number of complex cases that were coming through the center, this became increasingly more challenging to do. One of the roles of the resource worker is to build and maintain a comprehensive resource tool that will not only contain resources within our city, but also surrounding areas. One of the roles that this worker could assume in the future could also be receiving follow-up cases, for example, if there is only a request for community agency information. Within our model, this is a staff position, but it could also be a volunteer or student that fills this position depending on your resources or your specific community needs. We are delighted to have this position and the support that this can provide to those who need it.
To finish off this presentation, we thought it was fitting to show a video. I'm just going to open it up. We thought it was fitting to show a video about the advocate from a child's perspective, because that is really the most important part of what we do as an advocate, is to ensure that each and every client has a voice in this process.
The story of my advocate. I came to the CYAC with my mom to talk to a police officer. When I got to the CYAC, I met my advocate. I was kind of nervous, so my advocate explained what the CYAC is and what she does there. Then she gave me a tour of the CYAC. This is the kids interview room. This is the adult interview room. And then she showed me the medical room, where kids can have a doctor's appointment. My advocate helped us feel comfortable in the waiting room. It had TV, video games, and toys. She also gave me snacks and juice. My advocate introduced me to the team. There was a police officer and a children's aid worker. My advocate answered me and my mom's questions about the CYAC. When I went to go talk with the police officer, my advocate waited with my mom. My advocate explained the CYAC consent form and my mom did consent for services. Then my advocate waited with me and my mom went to talk to the police officer. My advocate gave my mom an information package to take home. She also let me take a stuffed animal and a blanket to take home with me, and told us that she would call in a few days to see how we are doing. But my mom felt a lot better about our experience because our advocate was there with us at the CYAC. And she is also helping us with services and resources. When my mom feels better, that makes me feel better. Hooray! Woohoo!
That concludes our presentation for today. At this time, we will take any questions or comments.
So someone asked about the training that you guys have received in order to become an advocate. What did you guys do?
Well, currently, so a lot has changed since the pilot, and we just adjusted the job description. So at this time, in order to be an advocate, you require a VA, VSW with 3 years experience or an MSW.
Another question is, are advocates able to work with youth who are sexually assaulted if they do not want to report to the police?
Yeah, so one of the nice things about our program is that there doesn't need to be police laying charges or really involvement. As long as it comes through the CYAC, we're fortunate enough to be able to work with anybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.